Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. Hope you guys are all doing really well. As you can tell by the title of today's video, I want to talk about the Great Resignation. Now, you may be hearing this word being thrown around a lot lately and definitely post-pandemic. So we're going to talk about what is the Great Resignation, why does it impact Australia, and what is happening around the world. So if you are interested in finding out, then please keep watching. Now, let's talk about what the Great Resignation actually is. So, given that a lot of us had to experience lockdowns during last year and this year, a lot of people have had time to reflect, think about their jobs and see whether their job is actually aligned to their goals and values. This ample amount of time during the lockdown period has been enough to trigger a lot of people and get them to shift their mindset in terms of their careers. So a lot of people have either been quitting their job, have been changing jobs, or have been asking for a promotion. So we're going to talk a little bit about what is happening in mainstream media. I've got a few news articles that I want to share with you guys. We are going to dissect those news articles and yeah, let's just get started. Okay, so I've got a news article here which talks about the Great Resignation and why Australians are looking to quit their jobs. Now, apparently the Great Resignation is about to hit Australia with millions anticipated to quit their jobs. So let's find out more. Now, if you've just come out of yet another stint of working from home through a lockdown and you're both physically and mentally exhausted, you are not alone. Now, I definitely remember when I was working my 9 to 5 and I had to obviously work during the lockdown period because remember, I only quit my job this year in March. So I was working from home up until then. And I definitely can tell you I was physically and mentally exhausted, especially when I was managing the side hustle and whatnot. So during the pandemic, 85% of employees globally experienced higher burnout and nearly half reported having a worse work-life balance. Now, if you can relate to this, I'd love to know your story down in the comment section below. So please do let me know. And if your boss was behaving like the last 2 years were just a bump in the road and is asking you to turn your attention to chasing down new targets and performance goals, you are not alone. I mean, that's the last thing I can really imagine. If you have to work from home during a pandemic and on top of that you've been asked to do more work, I mean, it's really not something I would be interested in. Now, for many of us, it will feel like reaching the finish line of a marathon, then being asked to start a triathlon. The unrelenting pressure on already burnt out and psychologically damaged knowledge workers has prompted the phenomenon, the Great Resignation, and it will lead to the biggest movement of talent that Australia and the rest of the world has ever seen. Now, do you fight or do you flight? Is your job a threat to your well-being? The question that keeps coming up is, why are we feeling this way? Why does it feel like it'll be easier to cut and run? It's ironic that in a time that our lives are so reliant on technology, the answer is somewhat primal. Now, as the dust settles, the economy improves and the breadth of job opportunities actually increase. The perceived need to be always available for work without any additional recognition, respect, or reward has many realizing that the work itself is now a threat to their happiness, health, relationships, and mental outlook. Now, I think there is actually a statistic here, which I will leave on the screen, which actually proves the divorce rate in marriages during this lockdown period, and especially if you've got a family as well of kids, then that divorce rate has actually increased, and we have obviously seen an increase in mental health issues as well. It's funny here because the article mentions that people feel like their jobs are actually a toxic relationship, which I know for me was very much true. For others, it's a simple desire for change, to say it's not you, it's me, and draw the line under the past 2 years. I know it's definitely going to be overwhelming. So apparently in the next coming months, we're likely to see an emancipation on a scale we've never seen before as people change roles or start entirely new careers. Be aware that the grass isn't always greener on the other side. Starting a new role, establishing new networks, and developing new skills takes time and energy, of which Aussies have precious time. Now, as we can tell, this article is very much talking about the Great Resignation hitting Australia and our careers. People are going to quit their jobs, people are going to start side hustles, become entrepreneurs. But is the Great Resignation actually a myth? And I'm speaking particularly for Australia. Are we changing jobs less than ever before? Now, apparently, what's been said about the Great Resignation is that it's a headline-grabbing American trend, which hasn't actually hit Australia. And we have been seeing in recent media reports that Australia's media has been warning of a surge of resignations here. But in actual fact, there is actually no such evidence of such a phenomenon taking place in Australia. And if there was a Great Resignation, it actually would not be a bad thing. Australia's resignation rate has actually fallen to an all-time low. Now, this term, the Great Resignation, was actually coined in late 2020 by Texas A&M University's Anthony Klotz. In response to developments, he said it collided like a perfect storm. So the growing number of quit rates and the burnout and the rethinking of work-life balance that followed from COVID. Over much of 2021, Klotz's predictions appear to be borne out in the US, with the monthly quit rate climbing from 2.4% in 2019 to about 2.9% in August. And this has actually been the highest ever recorded rate for the US. Now, of course, there's little evidence to suggest that this trend will actually come to an end over there anytime soon. But let's talk about Australia. Now, in Australia, the resignation rates are actually falling. So data collected each year by the Australian Bureau of Statistics suggests that in the 12 months to February 2021, almost 1.1 million Australians left their job. Now, that's actually not unusual because in most years, more than 1 million Australians actually leave their jobs. And leaving and changing jobs is actually a sign of a healthy and well-functioning labour market. If Australia has had a problem, it is with fewer and fewer quitting, something that the Treasury officials have identified as a contributor to low growth in both wages and productivity. Now, in the year from February 2021, the proportion of Australian workers switching jobs fell to an all-time low of about 7.6% of all employed Australians changed jobs that year, down from the peak of about 19.5% in the year 1988 to 89. Now, if we have a look at this graph here on the screen, we can see here the proportion of employed Australians who actually changed their jobs during the year. And as we can see, it's really interesting because Australia is very different compared to what's happening in the US. We can actually see a steady decline in the rate of switching jobs, which is actually very interesting to see. It must just come down to confidence and having that security in your workplace. You don't want to lose your job. Now, of course, it is possible the Australian labour market will actually change direction and ape the US labour market, but there are a few caveats worth noting. Although the quit rates in the US have increased significantly over the past decade, the increase was largely about playing catch up after the recession that accompanied the global financial crisis. So that was back in 2008 and 2009. Monthly US quit rates in 2019 were a little different to rates 20 years earlier. And secondly, the increase in the US quit rates has been uneven across sectors. There has actually been no increase in the finance or information and government sectors, but in leisure and hospitality, monthly quit rates have obviously jumped from 4.4 to 6.4%. Now, of course, we're going to see these types of economies and industries actually decline because there is a lot of uncertainty, and there was a lot of uncertainty in terms of hospitality and the travel industry as well. So that is quite understandable. Now, even in the US, only some resignation rates were climbing. Now, what does this mean for Australia? The first thing to say is that a rise in quit rates would be far from undesirable. Australians should actually welcome more resignations. Also, if job opportunities improve as the economy opens and competition for workers increase, quit rates should increase as more workers seek to move to jobs providing better wages and opportunities. But this article is suggesting that there's nothing unusual actually happening and there's nothing actually undesirable about the Great Resignation. Now, of course, with this word being thrown around a lot lately, there is obviously going to be fear, and a lot of people are going to fear that some workers might actually quit the workforce, especially older workers who are close to their retirement age and those with underlying health conditions. But nonetheless, with vaccination rates rising rapidly and predicted to exceed 90% very soon, we do not expect this to play a big role here in Australia. So at the end of the day, I suppose the real question is not so much around the Great Resignation, but how to actually deal with the great resistance to the idea of actually returning to the office and the daily commute. I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts on this and whether you are comfortable and happy to actually go back into the office and commute it to work, or whether you actually prefer working from home, and if that means, you get a lot more time time to wake up in the morning, go to the gym, have a nice, warm breakfast, prepare your meals, have lunch, and then clock off at your usual time, and then have some time to spend with your family afterwards. I would love to hear. I know personally for me, I'm definitely the latter one. I am such a big fan of working from home. I just feel it provides me with a lot of flexibility, and it would be something that if I was working my 9 to 5, I would definitely negotiate with my manager and my colleagues as well, of course. So now that that's all been said, I just want to go through and talk about how to actually resign the right way in case you are thinking of resigning. I know a lot of people have a few different ways of doing this, but here I've just got an article from Seek, which is obviously very, very credible. So let's talk a little bit about what's the right way of actually resigning and why is resigning actually so important. Now, resigning from a job and leaving an organization on good terms is very important in terms of building credibility through your career. Now, you might need that organization to be a reference for you in the future, and you never know who else they might speak to in the broader market. If you leave on a good note, 6 months down the track, people would say you did a great job. If you left on the right terms and if you want to come back, they would actually hire you. Now, this is definitely very important, especially for those of you who are actually going to remain within the working industry, the corporate world. You don't want anything negative to come out of it. So you do have to leave on good terms because you just never know when you might bump into another person. You definitely don't want to burn bridges. Now, for me personally, I may have burnt some bridges, but I know that I'm not going to go back to the corporate world. It's not something I am planning to do. So for me, I'm sort of going to do what works well for me. Now, the first question that comes up is, do you have to resign in person? Now, first things first, you should tell your manager in person. If that's not possible because you're based in a different location, then you could opt in for a phone call. Now, what should you say to your manager? Set up a meeting with your manager, but be ready to tell them why you're resigning on the spot. There's a good chance they already suspect it and they already know what you're about to do. It's best to keep your conversation around the facts, and you might say something like, I've been offered an opportunity and that's more in line with my career aspirations. Avoid airing grievances in your meeting and instead take the opportunity to briefly acknowledge what you have gained from the role. The perfect resignation is to show gratitude and appreciation for the time that your manager has taken to show you and grow you as an individual during the time at your organization, and mention that you have actually enjoyed the role greatly as well. Now, what should you actually write in a resignation letter? There are many templates out there outlining what you should actually write. A letter of resignation essentially acts as your legal document stating the date you want your notice period to begin. Now, simple resignation letter should include details of the person whom it is addressed to, the notice of termination of employment, when this is in effect from, your signature, etc. So you may want to add extra sentences or two thanking your boss for the opportunities that you have actually been given. And this article suggests that it is very important to leave on good terms. You want to remain as positive as possible. How much notice do you have to give? This is something you need to look into your contract. You would have signed this before starting your role. So have a look into your contract. And if you need to give more time, give more time. And what do you do after you resign? Now, of course, after you resign, you still have to be a normal, ordinary working employee. You're still required to complete the work. You're still required to, show up on time, finish up all your matters, do the handovers, and prepare to leave the organization. There will be an exit checklist as well. So you can look at that in terms of what else needs to be done. You can ask for your resignation to be effective immediately, but this is something that you should actually speak to with your manager. In terms of shortening your notice period, again, something you need to speak to your manager. This most likely won't work out because it's all written in your contract. And can you resign while you're on annual leave? Technically, yes, you can resign while you are on annual leave, but if you're aiming to resign on good terms, it's best to do it before you go on the leave or once you actually return from work. It again comes down to the point of making sure you give everyone and your organization ample amount of time, notice. You don't want to burn bridges and you want to leave on a positive note because you are going to be staying within this industry and you never know who you're going to bump into and what people say about you. So guys, that's everything that I wanted to talk about the Great Resignation. As I said, just to quickly sum everything up, it is definitely a major hot topic in the US, but in Australia, it's actually quite the opposite. We may see this trend appear here in Australia as well, but there is still some time before that does take place. And of course, if you are looking at resigning, I wish you all the best of luck for your new role or your new opportunity. And that's it, guys. I'm going to leave this here. I'll leave the articles that I mentioned down in the description box below as well. And that's it. I'll catch you guys in my next video. Thanks, guys.